Oh, we're gonna have to get something.
That joke is not unexpected. I have often been invited to stand on something behind the podium to make me tall enough to be seen. So this isn't too bad. Okay, well, I am happy to be here. I'm going to tell you about my Lamoni story. So you're not going to get my life story, only from the time I came to Lamoni. And I'm going to skip over about 10 years and come back to Lamoni because that's what I did. So basically, this is my Lamoni story. I did grow up in Wyoming, northeastern Wyoming, which is a distance away from Graceland University. Graceland, it was university when I came here in 1961. And my first memory of that trip was getting off the bus at the Varsity Drugstore. That's where the bus stopped. I wasn't sure how I was going to get out to Graceland, but figured I could do it. So got off the bus, and lo and behold, there were people there to meet me and others to take us on to campus. So that was much appreciated. I want to tell you about some of the businesses in Lamoni at that time, 1961. And I may not get them all exactly accurate, but these are some of my memories of the businesses in town. So got to get off at Varsity Drugstore. And I can't remember now if I just saw a picture of the old drugstore or if it was still the old drugstore at that time. But I've seen pictures of the old one, so it could be either one. But that was a disembark. So if you go east from there, there was a clothing store. So Braby's, he and his wife, Jim Braby and his wife, each had a clothing store. Jim had the men's clothing store and his wife had the women's clothing store. So going east of the drugstore, and I'm not going to name all the businesses there because I don't remember them all, but there was Jim Braby's clothing store. Across the street from that, across Linden Street west, was Edgerton's food grocery store. And sometimes we called it a meat market because they had fresh meat that cut off the slice and when you ordered it and give it to you. So Edgerton's was a small grocery store and was run by two brothers, Dwight and what was his name? Dwight and Lloyd Edgerton. So they had that. If you go then south of Edgerton's grocery store, one of the businesses, well, first there was the women's clothing store, and then later there was what we called the service center. Well, now it's the thrift store, but it was the same store, just different name. So the service center, and that had been there for a long time, and it's still in the same location. Now, if you go, I'm going to take you back east of the Varsity Drugstore. There was a cafe in there, and Rita Beerline, I'll remember her because she had red hair. She ran that little cafe in there. And my memory is a little bit more accurate on that because that's one place Ralph, who I was dating, took me for a meal as on a date. So we went into Rita's her cafe there and had lunch one day. So, and then next to that, going further east, and again, this may not have been there when I first arrived, but it did come later, was Layton's health food store. So Rigby and Ruth Layton started the health food store. And so there were all kinds of, vitamins and all kinds of things that we would, if you're conscious about your health, that you would purchase. And they would invite volunteers to come in and help. And so I did spend some time in that health food store. On the corner then was a gift shop. And if I remember right, Helen Hampton is the one that started that gift shop.
No, my mom.
Oh, your mom did? Okay. All right, Condit. So your what was your mom's first name?
Georgina.
Georgina. Okay, Georgiana. Condon. All right. So then Helen came maybe next. I'm not sure. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, Helen, and that changed hands. You know, Helen got cancer and she had to stop there. And Patty McDowell kind of took over. So that little, I always thought that was such a neat little gift shop there on the corner. Now, if you go across the street north, there's the Coliseum, a movie theater, which has been there forever. I'm not sure. I know it's over 100 years. Okay, all right. And then across the street west again from the Coliseum was Shipman's. And Dr. Shipman, he was a dentist, wasn't he, Sherry? That's what my memory is. But such a pretty little brick house. I always thought it was a neat place. But Dr. Shipman was there. If you go further west, there was Hackey's Dime Store. I mean, my kids loved that store because you could go in there and find just anything, candy and whatever you might like. It was just a fun place to go. And they were there, I'm not sure for how long, but for a long time too. There was a hardware store if you went a little further west. And then I remembered a dentist above the bank. And we've talked about that here already this weekend. Sidney Barrows, I think his name was Barrows. And I visited him one time, and then I learned that Dr. Vidic was also a dentist. So I didn't go back to Dr. Barrows. I don't remember it being a very pleasant experience. So across the street, and then there was the bank on the corner there. So we've talked, Serena talked to us about the bank. If you go across the street, west of there was the Hy-Vee grocery store. And it was, of course, bigger than Edgerton's. And we shopped there often, were delighted that it was a home-owned grocery store, began that way, and then it spread across the country. If you go further west, and we again mentioned that here, there was the Pantry, a little eating place that was a fun place to go. So, and then as we heard this morning, Silver and Roberts were on that street too. It was such a delight to, to hear Gary Silver talk about that business there. I really liked that little business. And I learned later that my neighbor was the Roberts of Silver and Roberts. Paul Roberts was the Roberts of the Silver and Roberts. And if you go north then of Silver and Roberts, there was a laundromat, but at one time there was a locker, a place where you could put your frozen foods, or you could rent space there. And I kind of think that may have been before we had as many deep freezes in our homes. It didn't stay there forever, but there was one there when I first came to Lamoni. And then across the street from going west from Silver and Roberts was White Motors. And my memory is of seeing cars in the window that they would be selling. But so White Motors business that was there. And then further west, the school was not too much farther along there. So, and it was in the same location where the school is now, but it had Harold House that was between the elementary and the secondary schools there. And so, a big building, multi-story building there. And that was used later as part of the school. But that school became important to me because I was in the teacher education program at Graceland. And I did my student teaching with Mrs. Post, who taught first grade. So that, I liked the school. And then we've talked also more than once here this weekend about Bill Ballantyne's College Dairy. I thought it was such a neat place. You could go there, walk in the door would be unlocked, and you could take whatever you wanted and leave money. It was just a place, he trusted us that we wouldn't, take advantage of him. And I doubt very many people ever did. But I just really appreciated the fact that we had actually a dairy and a place where we could get milk if we wanted fresh milk that way. So when I was at Graceland, just some of the places where I lived to give you some idea, I lived in Patroness Hall, which was a dormitory when I first went to Graceland. And you probably mostly all know where Patroness Hall is now. And then my second year, I lived at East Hall, and we made mention of East Hall. It was the college farmhouse. So it was kind of on the east side of Graceland, and I enjoyed my experience at East Hall as well. And the next place I lived as a junior at Graceland was at Chuck and Eris Emsley's home. I was one of those who rented downstairs her home. So Mary Jean, I think she went by Murdoch at that time, and Burl Butterfield. And there was one more of us who I can't remember her name was, but during that time I was dating Ralph Straight. So I wasn't there a lot. And I think they kind of, I don't know if they were disturbed about my dating or what, but I'd sometimes kind of both, I think. So, because none of them were dating and I was dating. But, so Eris Emsley is Nancy Condit's mom and dad. So Nancy up here with Alan Condit. So that was a good year, Nancy. I remember that. So I wanted to share something about straight. So how many of you knew? Okay. A few of you, yeah, right. Okay. So when I went to Graceland, Ralph kind of knew members of my family. I didn't know him at all, but he looked me up and he wanted to date. And so, we dated. I had other dates besides him, but he was pretty persistent. So eventually, he and I were married in June of 1964. It was between my junior and senior year at Graceland. Back in Wyoming is where we were married. And then I went ahead and we rented a little house from Art and Alice Fisher. So that was on Maple Street. I don't know if you remember Art and Alice Fisher, but they had this little doll house that was not far from the campus, so in walking distance. It was, pretty tiny. I had one bedroom, a little bathroom, a little living room, a tiny little kitchen. And I rather enjoyed it. But one of my memories that wasn't so pleasant in that house. So I take off for class one morning, and when I'm coming back, I smell something strange and a little unpleasant, and I wonder what it is. And the closer I get to my home, the more I realized it was coming from our house, and there was smoke. And I went around the window and looked in, and the burner on the cook stove was bright red, and there was smoke coming up. So I go in the house, and sure enough, I'd left a pot on the stove, and it had squirrel cooking in it because Ralph had brought home a squirrel for us to have for dinner, and I was cooking the squirrel on low because it's so tough, and I'd forgotten to turn the heat off, and it burned. It was the awfulest stench you can imagine. I don't think we ever got that smell out of the things that were in that house. And, and yellow paper. I mean, there was no fire, but it was a memory I won't forget. It was pretty bad. So Graceland was a good experience for me. I was the Crescent when I first arrived there. It was sophomore year, actually, is when they identified people who were Crescent. And a Crescent was simply someone who did nice things for people in our house. And so that's what I did, which I enjoyed doing. Classes were good. I enjoyed teacher education program, always knew I wanted to be a teacher. And, Mary Beth Evans was one of my favorite teachers. She taught teacher education courses, and I worked for her while I was there. So all in all, it was a good experience being at Graceland. When I student taught, I wanted just to mention a little bit about that. Ralph taught, back up. We were both offered jobs at Lamoni schools. when we graduated. And he was offered the 6th grade and I was offered the 5th grade as teachers. We couldn't pass that up. If it hadn't been for that, I probably wouldn't still be in Lamoni, but both offered the job, couldn't pass it up. So we took that job. Ralph taught 6th grade and later he coached the track and taught physical education in the elementary school. I taught 5th grade, as I mentioned, and some of my students, you'll know some of these people, was Ruth Higdon, which is, Rich's daughter, Alfie, yeah, sister, right, not daughter, yeah. Alfie Fulton, Debbie Beerline, yeah, Debbie Beerline, and some of these, I don't know where they are. Ted Smith, who's, I don't know if he's still at the school, but he was for a long, long time. Bobby Gray. I mean, these are just some that come to my mind. Once we did field trips because I liked taking the students out because I thought they learned so much by just getting out and seeing things. One of those was to the slaughterhouse, which was east of Lamoni, if you remember where that was. West, yeah, right, Paul. West of Lamoni, kind of out on the edges of town. That was quite an interesting experience for all of us. So me too. I'd never seen anything like it before. But the kids learned what happened, with their meat. So that was good. I think one of the lessons for me teaching that 5th grade was I learned that if you want to have a classroom full of students who respected you, you had to respect them. You couldn't discipline them with force or with, if you did that and they lost respect for you. I'm not saying a firm hand isn't important, it is. But I did learn that the best way you can work with them and they'll respond to you if they know you like them, if you respect them and treat them with respect. So that was a really important lesson for me that I still remember today, is how do we treat people? If you want to build positive relationships, I need to respect people, to do that. I need to respect them for who they are, regardless of who they are. If I remember right, Mrs. Lintard was the other 5th grade teacher. I don't think it was 6th grade. I think there were actually 2 5th grade classrooms at that time. School had more students in it than it does today. Okay. So when Ralph and I started teaching school, we moved. We moved to a house on West Main Street. If you know today where George Jones has his office, the corner of North Silver and Main Street, if you know where that is, the house we moved into that we were renting was across the street south after it was on the east of the corner street. I think Daisy and I can't remember for sure. Is it Jose? His name is, live there now. And I can't even say their last names, but she walks the trail, so I know who she is. But we lived there. And it was while we were living there that I learned that I was pregnant. And it was kind of towards the end of my year teaching 5th grade. And Ralph and I talked it over and we decided that I would not work. I would not go back to school, but we would have our child and I would stay home with the baby, which is what happened. So in February of 1967, Ralph took me over to Mount Air Hospital, and Dr. Swanson, who several of you will remember, Dr. Swanson was my doctor. He was the nicest, kindest doctor. I had never had a baby before, didn't know what it was going to be like, but he explained it all to me, and there was a mirror up on the wall where I could see what was happening, and he explained what was happening. So it was all such a neat learning experience that I hardly remembered, especially today, all the pain that went with childbirth. But it was really a very humbling, awesome experience for that. Since I was not teaching and income was lower, we decided we'd better find another place to live that was a little more reasonably priced for us. So we moved to the little house out on the west part of town that's across the street from Liberty Hall, the littler house that you have to go a little farther west, and that's where we lived when Sally was a baby. We had a little dog we called Peanuts, and Ralph loved it out there because there was this big barn building, and he could store all kinds of things in there, and it was a good place for us. And while we were there, we had two more children. They were both boys, Tim and Jim. So those were good years for us. So I wanted to share a little bit more with you about Ralph. I want to introduce him to some of you who did not know him. Ralph was, number one, he won the mile. He set the mile limit out at Graceland while he was a student there, 4.11 mile. So he was a runner. And they also, I don't know if the mile record I know was beat, but they also had a record for a relay team that ran. And that, last I knew, was still there. It may not be now. I doubt that it is now because that's what records are for, to beat. But so he was always, if he's going to do something, he wanted to do it well. I mean, he would not go back like during homecoming at Graceland and run with other alumni if he hadn't been training for it and knew that he could win. He did one time go back and run, but the people he ran with were friends like Sam Keck and Ashby Cooper. They all agreed ahead of time they'd go across the line together. Nobody would be a winner or a loser. So, so that's part of his personality. He was also a kind person, a caring person. When he taught school, he would take those kids under his wing and he would work with them, like some who wanted to run track. He would work with them and he would take time just to support them. Another example of him, one day when he and I and our three children were in the car, we were coming back from somewhere between Leon and Lamoni, and we saw this car off the road, kind of down in the ditch. Well, Ralph stopped. That was just him. And lo and behold, there was a guy down there in the car. So Ralph invites him to come up. He can't get the car out. He has him get in the car and we head home. And then he takes the guy back out there and they end up being able to pull the car out. However, it was not running well. So guess what? That young man, he stayed in our home and he was there for several days, slept in our house, and, you know, kids got acquainted with him and we enjoyed him. And then he disappeared. The car was still parked behind our house and sat there for a long time. And we found out after we did some searching that he was in prison because he had been forging some checks. And that car really was not even his car. And so what we did with that was we found out where he was. I started writing letters to him and, you know, creating a relationship with that young man. I can't remember. I know he would write back and be appreciative, but I just thought, you know, that was who Ralph was. He would take his time to help people. Whenever anybody needed help, he was there. And if he left the house to go do something, get gas in the car or whatever, I knew I could not count on when he would be back, because he would find somebody and he'd start talking and it could be hours later, who knew? So I just got used to that. We never made it anywhere right on time because, you know, but we wouldn't be too late, but not on time. So that was just part of who he was. He was a good-hearted, good person. And so I appreciate the fact that he's the father of my three children. And just a little bit more in the home with the kids. Ralph loved his kids. I mean, that's probably one of the hardest things about his death was the fact that I knew he wouldn't be able to enjoy the kids like he always did. He would come home from school and he would play with them. You know, he would get a blanket and they'd sit on the blanket and he'd pull them through the house. You know, he'd run and play and laugh with the kids. At Halloween, he'd dress up, you know, and anybody came to the door, he'd try to scare them. And he was just a fun person that way. So I really, he was a good person. He was a good person. We were married for 8 years. So some of our neighbors, okay, so we were living in a little house out in the country, out towards Liberty Hall. And when we had 3 kids, we decided that little house was not big enough anymore. So we moved back into town and we lived in the house where George Jones currently has his practice there on the corner of North Silver and Main Street. So that became our home. Some of our neighbors, which some of you will remember, Jenny and Bruce Knofsker were just west of us in the next block. And Jenny sold, what was it? Anyway, it was sales out of the home kind of thing. So she sold stuff there. Mr. Knofsker, who was an older man, Mr. Bruce Knofsker's dad, was across the street on the corner south of us. And so he was an important part of our life. We'd go visit him. Paul and Cora Roberts were next door north. I mentioned Paul Roberts is the Roberts and Silver filling station. They were on our north. His sister Beth was across the street in kind of the next house to the corner. On the corner was Mabel Cole. I think, was she related to you, Lester? Yeah. Okay, and Beth Prawl. And down the road a bit were the Siddles, Cecil and Mary Lou. They had kids kind of the same age as our kids. And so they would come up and play. There was a woman who counted birds further on North Silver Street, and I can't remember her name. It wasn't Edith Thorpe, I don't think. I think it was somebody else. So some of you may remember, but she really liked the birds, and she counted birds. Pam and Ben Baker, those names may mean something to you. They were kind of down where Lloyd and Harriet White live now, in that house. They lived down there. So, I mean, just people, neighbors, friends, people that we did things with and worked with. So, I mean, that was kind of the community, our community. Sally, especially, I remember her going to a daycare that was held in the church, the Lamoni Community of Christ Church. And one incident that happened well, I'm going to save that for later. So I want to tell you a little bit about what happened. So one night, Ralph gets a call from, I think it was Lydia, his sister, saying that their stepmother had died. And they lived out, she and Ralph's dad lived out in close to Portland, Oregon. So Jim Strait, who was Ralph's half-brother, was married to my sister, Lucy. And Jim and Lucy were in Iowa City. He was going to medical school. And so Jim made contact with Ralph and he says, I'm going to get a plane. I'm going to borrow a plane and fly down and take you, and we will go out to the funeral. Jim had been taking flight lessons for some time, and he had far enough along that he was allowed to fly on his own, with Ralph there. And so he flew into Mount Air, and Ralph, we got in the truck and he drove over to Mount Air and met him there, and they took off. So we didn't hear from him, and they were to call us, as soon as they arrived, and we never heard from them and started to worry. And I called the airport where he left from, and they didn't have any information from them either, but they began to be worried and started searching. So Lucy then, she had a little boy, Nick, came down from Iowa City where they were living to Lamoni. And so we came down to our home, and waited to hear. we didn't know what in the world happened, but of course, as time went on, we became more and more worried. And finally, about 8 days later, we got a call that told us that they had been found. A woman driving along the highway saw a glint off in the distance, and they went and checked it out, and it was a plane that had been hit the side of the mountain and crashed, and both of them were killed. And so, yeah, I guess the first emotion I had was relief that they had died instantly, because they told us it appeared to them that they had died instantly. And so that was such a huge relief, because we didn't have any idea that they could be suffering somewhere. We figured something had happened, didn't know what. And so, I mean, that was a huge shift and change in our lives. Lucy moved back to Lamoni, which was really a blessing for both of us, because we were there and could support each other. So I had 3 children. Lucy's son, Nick, was the same age about as my middle son, Tim. And then she gave birth to a little girl about a week later. So she had 2 children, I had 3. I can remember when we found out that I needed to tell my kids, I needed to let them know what had happened. Sally was 5, Tim was 3, Jim was not quite 2. So I took them outside. I know right where I went. And we huddled together, and I told them what happened. And I said, it was an accident that happened. And I mean, your dad was killed. They didn't cry. We took a walk together. Everybody was pretty quiet. But they were young, and it was just shock, I'm sure. So that I didn't hear the crying there. But later, when Sally was walking over to her preschool school over to church, because we weren't very far, so she was walking over there, her little kitten was following her, and she didn't know it. When she went across the road, so did the kitten behind, and got hit by a car and was killed. And Sally just cried and cried and cried and cried. And I knew, it was because she was crying for her dad, not for the kitten as much. It's for her dad. And it was a blessing for her to be able to cry like that, to release those emotions that were there. I talked to the kids later as they got a little older and just asked them, what are your memories of your dad? Sally, she remembers her dad, but she was concerned because she was forgetting what he looked like as time went on. And she had a hard time with men after that. She and Ralph were close, but ever after that, it was, she didn't want anyone to touch her. I mean, she was protecting herself, I think, is what was happening there. But Tim and Jim, I mean, they were so young, but Ralph became their model. It was like he was perfect. I knew he wasn't perfect, but in their mind, and I thought, what does it matter? If they want to see him that way, let them. He's a good model for them. And so that's, as they got older, I mean, we grow and we learn from our experiences. But anyway, community support was awesome when that happened. I mean, everyone was so kind. I ended up taking care of all 5 kids, and Lucy went back to nursing. She was a nurse, and so she reassumed her nursing position. And one day, a man came in with his wife who was in child labor, and Lucy was there as her nurse. And the mother actually died. The little baby survived, but the mother died. And later, Larry Baxter, who was that woman's husband, came courting Lucy, and they ended up getting married in time. And so he had 2 boys with a baby that had been born, and she had 2, so they had 4 children then, and ended up having 1 together. But life goes on like that. Oh, I'm getting close here. So The next stage of my life that I'll just mention is that I remarried as well. I married Will Reiser. He was teaching sociology at Graceland and later learned computer science, so he did some computer science teaching. Will was interesting in that he was kind of an entrepreneur. He always wanted to build a dome house, so he did. And he built a house that is still standing here in Lamoni. If you've seen the dome house, that's the one that Will built. And it was such a neat experience. We lived in it for a year. It was a fun place to live, had a fireplace in the middle and a loft up above and pretty open, but it was a neat place. We also, somebody wanted to buy the dome house. So in a year's time, we sold it. And then we needed a place to live. And so Will was looking for some property. He knew I liked the country because I grew up in Wyoming. And so in the process of looking, I think we lived in Dan and Becky's house part of the time. We lived in Dairy Hall, if you know where Dairy Hall is. I know some of you do know and some of you probably don't, but it was a Graceland house that was used as a dormitory for a period of time. And that was fun for the kids because they were upstairs, and one night they got out the window upstairs and dropped down on the ground and I think picked up Steve and Nate, Becky's two kids, and they went exploring town in the nighttime. They thought that was so much fun. Their adventure, going and snuck back in the house and we never even knew it till years later. Just fun things, that kids do exploring. Louita Clothier, bless her heart, Ralph had always wanted his kids to learn violin, and she gave violin lessons to Sally and Tim. Jim chose not, but Tim to this day has played the violin in concerts all over the place wherever he goes to live. So lots of wonderful people. So Will took a sabbatical from Graceland. He was going to go to Des Moines, work for Pioneer Hybrid, who wanted him to, which he did. I stayed home because Sally had a baby and I was helping with Kyle while she went to Graceland. In a year's time, I joined him up there and we were there for, a total time away from Lamoni was about 10 years. But while I was there in Des Moines, I went on to Iowa State University and got my graduate degree, my master's and my PhD, Human Development and Family Studies, which was a wonderful program. I really liked it. Will then got invited to go to France because Pioneer Hybrid had a business in France as well. And we thought, wow, what a neat experience. So he took off. I was still in graduate school. So I stayed in Des Moines. And he met a woman there that he couldn't write enough about when he wrote and talk about her. And I began to worry some. But I thought, well, so when I went there, I figured we could work things out. Well, we worked it out, but it was probably not what I'd hoped. So we ended up being divorced over that. He's still in France and he married Francois. I like her. I mean, I always liked her. She was a really nice person. I just wasn't too pleased with Will's choices of finding somebody else. And I said, don't you ever do that again. Don't you do that to her. But I came back. I came back to Lamoni. So that was when I returned after the 10 years to Lamoni. And eventually my mom and dad, who'd moved from Wyoming to Lamoni because they had so many kids attending Graceland, about, I think, 8 kids all at the same time. And they were close to where Al and Nancy live now. Yeah. And so the grandkids would come across, and grandma always had food for them. And granddad had a lot of warm hugs. And it was wonderful for our family to have them there. But when I came back, they were country folks too. So I said, how would you feel about building a house with me out on the farm? Because I had part of the farm as the divorce decree. And so we did that. And we split the price of that house and had some really good years there. I lived downstairs, they lived upstairs with the intent that when one of them died, I'd be there for the other one. And that's what happened. My mom died with cancer. My dad, who was supposed to die first, lived till he was 92. And finally, one day he said to me, I think you're going to be okay. I said, Dad, don't worry about me. I'll be fine. he died shortly thereafter. I was like, he decided it was okay now, he could go. So, and it was fine. I stayed on the farm for a few years, rented the downstairs to John and Charlotte Watley. I don't know if anyone, yeah, Linda would remember them. And they enjoyed it there as well. Just, so then I sold the farm. After a period of time, I sold the farm because I was there by myself and there was a lot of work. I did have cattle there, which I enjoyed a lot, but I knew that in time, I really probably needed to be in town. So I sold it and moved into town. Part of the reason for that was I've always believed that you ought to live with the people. If you have a feeling for wanting to make the place a better place, you ought to be living there and not far away and coming in and doing your thing. And so that's part of the reason I moved into town. So I'm a firm believer in the importance of relationships. So community is all about relationships, and it's one person at a time. You build relationships with persons, and that becomes people. And so I couldn't be more blessed than I am than living in Lamoni. I've been pretty involved in the community, which has been good, really, really have appreciated it. I'm kind of needing to slow down now, and it's hard to do it because you can't find anybody who will take it over. But some of my mottos, one of them that is relatively recent, but I really believe it. Whatever your goals are for your life, I could pick on Paul. He's all for peace. So whatever your goals are for life, you need to be living it now. You don't wait and live it later. You live it now. If you believe in peace, then that's what you need to be doing, is living peace now. And so I really think that's true. I'm not a pro-violent person at all. I do not like it. I do not like a lot of what's going on in our world today. But so I say, do what you can, when and where you are. I can't do everything. I can't change what's happening in Washington, D.C. with political parties, but I can do something in Lamoni. So do what you can, when and where you are. That's my motto too. So Lamoni is a good place. I'm glad I'm here. And there's more I could tell you, but that's enough for now. So.
Okay, any questions?
Lorrie, you were talking about the businesses in Lamoni in 1960s. You left out my favorite one.
What was that?
You go to the drugstore and go east. You went by the clothing store, and across the alley was the library.
Oh, you're right. Exactly.
And when the library was built down in front of the school, then the community turned out. And we passed the books. We had enough people that we passed the books from one person to another, all the way from the library on East Main to the library down where it is now. And in a very short period of time, transferred the library.
Amen. David, I was part of that too. And so, no, I don't know how I forgot that, but yeah, great. That was a good library on East Main, but oh, what a beautiful library now.
When was that?
When? Oh, I don't remember the year. Do you, David? Yeah. I just remember doing it.
Around 2000. I'm not going to go through all of the wonderful programs that Lorrie has initiated and continued in Lamoni. I will just say that when I retired from Graceland in 2008, Lorrie was immediately on me to start a public service project in Lamoni. That's the kind of woman she is.
No. Well, I always said I would get things started, but then you guys had to do all the work. So, you know, we have, I mean, Lamoni is a great place, great number of volunteers.
I've known Lorrie for many years. I think first met her when she lived a block south of us, maybe 2 blocks south, I guess it was. And I remember her when her husband passed away. She was a person of strength, raised her children, and she has always been a person of action in her later years. And when I came back to Lamoni after Joyce had passed away, she was a strong person to talk to me and help me in my time of need. So I have appreciated Lorrie and the work that she has done all these years. She has been a person of action.
Thank you, Lester. Appreciate that. I will say, when Ralph was killed, if I began to feel down and low, one of the things I learned to do was take the kids, get out of the house and go see someone. So Mr. Nofsker became a really important person, older man that lived across the street. I'd take the kids, we'd go over and see Mr. Nofsker. I bet you we were there 5 or 10 minutes and back out we went, because those kids, you couldn't keep them quiet for long. They were young and full of energy, but it was enough just to get out and go. It was enough just to get my mind off myself, you know, and go where somebody else was. So that was good. Yeah.
I ran with Ralph on the track team.
Okay.
He was a wonderful distance runner. I was the shorter distances, but if I remember correctly, and you would have to, I think he was the one who took all the medals and the ribbons that he won after they were awarded. And he would go out to Big G Lake and throw them in the lake. He was, he didn't care about keeping that kind of honor around. The rest of us were hoarding our medals so far as we could get them. But Ralph just took it out there and just throw it as far as he could into the lake. But it didn't matter, did it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't remember that, Bill. Were you on the relays then?
Yes, it was a shorter mile relay was what I was.
Okay. Jim.
Yeah, just, you were talking about that side of the street. Did Hackey's go all the way to the Shipmans, or was there something else in that building?
Oh, there
Was it a bar then?
There was a cleaners, and then the bar, and then shipments.
okay.
Okay. So Rim Fryers, was that it? No, that was a different bar. Okay. Now, when we came here, there was also a shoe repair place, but I doubt if it was there.
Yeah.
Then.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it definitely, when I came back after that 10 years away, there was such a big change. There had been such a big change in businesses. Yep.
The library was on that side too.
Yeah. On the south side.
Yes, on that side.
Yeah.
So I know you were mentioning your husband, how he would always like stop and be helping or talking to everybody. I think he picked up his mantle. Because every time I see you, you are walking everywhere,
Well,
helping everyone, always stopping. I mean,
Well-
you're my go-to person when I meet. It's like, okay, who can help me with this? Or can you know, do this?
well, I
You're
hope,
amazing.
hope so. I hope so.
Yes. Any other questions or comments for?
All right. Well, thank you, everyone.